Welcome to Forestry Now, where we explore the forces impacting profitable and sustainable management of commercial forests and natural woodlands. I'm Dermot McNally. Today I speak with Andy Dunne. Andy's an agricultural consultant based in Portlaoise. He's also a forest owner and a member of the Laois Offaly Farm Forestry Group. Andy explains how he manages his own forest and his experience working with Adjoining forest owners managing their combined area through Continuous Cover Forestry. Then we talk about his role as an agricultural consultant and his experience advising farmers about their options under the current afforestation programme. He highlights the way forestry has been marginalised outside of farming and how this affects the attitudes of landholders to it. Finally, he explains with clear examples how current restrictions around afforestation rarely result in the best outcome for nature. As always, links and contact details are in the show notes below. Sign up to the Forestry Now newsletter, and finally, enjoy the conversation with Andy Dunne.
I'm 60 plus years of age, so I've been in agriculture for all my life, from a small farm in County Laois. Got a good practice going. Fairly quickly things expand if you have an appetite beyond schemes and things, and you become an advisor. You become a trusted advisor in many houses. So that's how I got into agricultural consultancy.
When you started the agricultural advisory service, was that in Portlaoise itself, and were you still farming a little bit, or what was happening on the home farm?
Yeah, the home farm was 40 acres, and this will probably segues into, your question will segues into forestry, quite close to Portlaoise, Laois County Council and the NRA, the National Roads Authority, in their wisdom, decided to put a road square up through our farm. More or less at the time I was transitioning, if you like, from teaching into agricultural consultancy. While I was farming, the farm was subject to a CPO, and we lost a good lot of it, and it was badly divided by the impact left at four sides of a major roundabout. You have to kind of move on. So we got money. Almost by accident, there was a thing called rollover relief, which allowed you reinvest the money that you got into a similar asset. So I bought land that was marginal enough. I very quickly planted it. Yeah, it was very attractive in comparison. That it was quite easy to plant it. There was the complication was very low level, and there was a good income stream. If you could look into the future at all, any little bit, which is a difficult thing to do in terms of projecting your life forward 20 years, it wasn't a bad thing to do. And I was very interested in forestry and the land use. It was a type of tillage for me, but similar but quite different. But it was a land use that I connected with at the time.
So just to say, do you still farm separately to that, or is your main farming enterprise then the forestry itself?
I would have a few cattle all the time, not many, so I still farm, but my main land or farming enterprise is now forestry.
Now, I'm very interested to hear about the collaborative arrangement, we'll say, that you have with a couple of other adjoining forest owners. I've heard you talk about that before. Maybe you could explain maybe how that came about.
One of my forestry colleagues in particular was very helpful from day one. Me and him and I have, I suppose, progressed together. As well as being a forester, he also owns forest. And we bought some plots of forestry adjoining, plots of land which we afforested, but we probably 3 or 4 other landowners apart from us that are also adjoining us. We decided very early on that we had to do our best to work collaboratively with these people. So it was a very positive decision to do that from day one. We realised we couldn't. None of us, neither them nor us, could really operate without crossing one another's land, without knowing what we were doing management-wise with the forest, all that sort of thing. So, in practical terms, it really comes down to talking and communicating and being aware. Okay, not everybody's goals are the same, but at the same time, being aware that there is a very strong mutual benefit to getting on with people and facilitating people and reciprocating their facilitation of us, So, I mean, I've probably simplified things like right-of-ways, things like roading, building roads, to not just thinking about yourself when the road is being built, thinking who else needs to benefit from this, and hoping that the other guy will say, well, this is not just for me, there are other people as well as me, so that sort of thing.
So in a practical sense, Andy, let's just take the roads then. Does that mean that you did a shared road application? And does one road come in and serve 2 or maybe 3 other forest owners? Or what does it look in a practical? Because I know at times people can be slow to have to create a new right-of-way across their farm to give someone else access through.
I suppose the road one is interesting because everybody gained from the cooperation. Now, there was no shared road as such. There was a road, it's not one block leading to another, but it has that effect. So the road that was built on mine connected up with the road that was built on the next guy, and that connected up with, but we both then have different ways out, but one road is actually serving the 3 plantations or the 4 plantations, and potentially will serve another one. That's a younger plantation and there's no road yet. So, and to do that, we've had to trust one another, first of all. And also then we've had to probably formalise it and grant each other and our successors in title rights of way to, forestry will outlive us all, as you know. So you have to consider that the next generation or even the generation after that mightn't see the world the same way as we do now, but we have to try and provide for what's best. The first thing we did was we made sure that everybody had fair and equitable access. Now, who fixes the potholes and all that when they emerge is another matter, but fundamentally, if everybody looks after their own, it should be okay, and some problems you can't kind of address because you don't know what's coming at you anyway, but if you start with a positive perspective. So the roads are an interesting one. Worked really well for us and has worked really well. And there's no problem with access. It's gone further in the management system. In the particular block of wood you're talking about, there's a general management moving towards continuous cover forestry there. Change, as you probably know, is difficult to sell. So even to get people to plant and then to get them into a system and then to change their system, all that involves change. But it was easy enough. The other guys had confidence in us that, well, if them lads are doing it and they've thought it through and they haven't blackguarded us so far, we're happy to kind of progress. So there's a large block now of land, 3 or 4 owners, not all in CCF, but all moving towards it.
Can we just expand on that? Because I'm aware of an example where perhaps someone's in CCF and genuinely making a massive effort on one side of a barbed wire fence, but the neighbour next door to them, forestry owner, is in a clear fell rotation or has decided to manage that way. And the act of clear fell on the neighbour's site could have a very devastating effect from a wind stability on the other side of the fence. Was that a consideration for yourselves? Are the trees planted that close over the boundary lines that you're effectively in a contiguous forest?
They're right up to one another, yeah. And it's something that you would have to consider. I've seen the effects of one neighbour, maybe with a slightly older forest, whipping down the trees and exposing the new forest edge and the devastation that comes, and very frustrating. We, through luck, I would say, but again, back to Jack Nicklaus, we worked hard at it and we conceded things and we were open and fair and all that. At least we thought we were anyway. We think we have avoided that sort of a scenario. So in effect, while there are 3 or 4 owners there, it will be managed as a single unit for everybody's benefit. There's really big pragmatic benefit there in terms of forest management if you can get everybody aligned. And similarly, if even in conventional forestry systems, I mean, if neighbours could even just make one another aware of what they were doing, so that if John's forest was going to be cut down next year, yours is 2 years younger, beside him, you could have a chat and say, John, can you hold off for a little while? Let me mobilise. I don't want to be, I need another year's growth or something like that. But, and again, one of the difficulties of forestry is that it's slipped a little bit out of farming hands into institutional hands, and institutional hands tend to just serve their own interest. And we're talking things that aren't well seen, but are very impactful on maybe John in Leitrim or Paddy in Laois with their 15 or 20 acre block, and the neighbour whips, the institutional neighbour whips down theirs, and John and Paddy are left very vulnerable, So the benefits of collaboration are wide, I would say,
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right about that. And who owns what? Because someone living in an area, the plot may have been sold twice, and it mightn't be clear who even owns it. So, in terms of interventions, then, how many thinnings have you done, and how has it stood up to the wind? Especially Storm Éowyn was massive in the northwest, but how did it affect you down there?
The CCF block has been thinned once, a first thinning, pretty similar to a conventional thinning. You put in the racks and you take a small bit out. So you're just kind of setting it up really for subsequent interventions. Now, most of it's in the South Midlands, Laois Offaly. Most of it has stood up fairly well. A bit that was thinned very close to the time of the storm was affected. A little bit that was thinned maybe a year before the storm was also affected. But there was a complicating factor in that there was a drain blocked. We collaborated with a statutory agency to go in. They let them in to do something. They blocked the drain and they didn't clean it and we didn't pursue it. And an acre or two was blown down. Now, you could argue that was marginal for the species, or it's maybe nature telling you, I don't want Norway spruce growing there. And we lost maybe an acre and a half or two of maybe 20-year-old, 22-year-old Norway spruce. These things happen, but it certainly wasn't the devastation that I've seen up across the west and northwest. We would hope that the CCF would be more resilient. I mean, that's the whole theory of it. It's resilient to natural events that are otherwise maybe devastating,
And just to be clear, we're talking predominantly about conifer plantations here, not broadleaf.
Well, where we're talking actually is quite a mix. It's probably maybe 60-40 conifer to broadleaf. There's sycamore in it. There was ash, but that has had to be removed. There's Norway spruce, a little bit of oak. Interestingly, the predominantly affected species in the storm, and even the storm damage was relatively minor, was spruce. Norway spruce, yeah. You could look at it and say, well, maybe Norway shouldn't have been there in the first place. That's an argument. And I think in Project Woodland or around that, they were talking about the right tree in the right place for the right reason. There's a lot more to that than the glib way it was thrown out. The spruces are the cash cow of our forest industry. They're also best to fix carbon, but if they don't stay standing, there are horses for courses. That's the issue. It's a very complex kind of scenario now.
It is. It's a very complex scenario, and we can perhaps we'll touch on that, because the reality is that once the premiums run out on the broadleaf, you're not getting any commercial return unless there's some major changes on ecosystem service payments or carbon. So it's challenging. In other words, there's an area that's being managed, you might say CCF, but there's also other blocks within that overall area that are clear planned, or
that general area is CCF, but there are other blocks at maybe 15 or 20 mile separations from there. I'll call them conventionally managed, mainly because they were quite well advanced. Some of these, there's a block 30 years old there now of Sitka spruce. It couldn't be converted at the stage it was at.
If you're interested in forestry, maybe buying, maybe selling, maybe just curious, then have a look on forestsales.ie. There's forests, young and old, for sale all over Ireland, including in Andy's area of Laois Offaly. Get in touch with Paul at forestsales.ie, who'll be happy to help. Now, back to Andy. Andy, I want to ask you one or two other questions just about that kind of collaborative approach. So I presume you did a joint road application, did you? Or was that...
No, the roads were separate. They were jointly planned, but the applications were individual applications. The Forest Service Inspector was aware of our thinking and was very supportive of the approach. He knew that we wanted to kind of link up these and that we were all in one way interdependent on one another anyway. So he facilitated that as best he could within the rules of the regime, you know.
Yeah. And then when it came to the actual thinning licenses, Andy, again, have you all done individual thinning licenses with your own forester, or is there a facility within the department to do a single application? Because let's be honest, for a small forest owner, some of the the cost of the administration and the license application fees are substantial enough.
They are. In our case, we worked individually again, but we probably had the benefit that the forester that's engaged is part of the group, if you like. So he doesn't have to be convinced. In fact, he does a lot of the convincing of what might be the best collective approach here. That's
very helpful because, in effect, you have the advice in-house and he's a stakeholder.
He is, and he also, I suppose, the fact that he's a forester and can maybe see at a high level what needs to be done for the collective. Okay, he's bought into it himself, is beneficial. You have in situations that probably more common situations, you have 3 or 4 foresters looking after 8 or 10 different blocks of land and nobody knows what they're doing, and that's not helpful. And probably little bits of roads emerging and not connecting, and where there might be mutual benefit is lost. And back to that thing of nobody knowing what's their neighbours doing,
Yeah, no, it's very true. Well, just on that, then you're living through the process of collaborating with your neighbours. What else should the state be doing at a high level to try and facilitate just clusters of owners, be they adjoining or nearby, to encourage them to work together and to, I suppose, find ways of simplifying their own management?
You have to understand, I suppose, the way the state works. It's very linear, and that doesn't help. But that's probably, from its perspective, the only way it can work. But if I go back to our own example, where the Forest Service Inspector was able to lay out on the table or on the screen the mapping and say, well, if we put a road here and here and here, it'll benefit everybody. So that the inspectorate might adopt a more holistic approach rather than an individual approach to an application. It's very easy. A file comes in, you look at it. Farmer Joe wants 300 metres of a road. We'll give him that, and we won't take any consideration into what's going on all around him, in other forests, maybe even in adjoining forests. So the value of collaboration and collective thinking would be valued and pushed a little bit more. Now, I know this is very difficult because I know how state entities work, and a file is a file and you deal with that. But if we don't change, we end up doing the same thing, and we're not making a great job of it at the minute, So more collaborative thinking as well as action. Ultimately, I suppose we have saved ourselves and we've saved the state a good lot of funding, by optimizing the road layout. So if some funding could be diverted to incentivize that kind of thinking, it probably would help things. to be fair to the Forest Service, they have supported those things and supported them quite well. Ultimately, the success of the forestry program, if you like, comes down to individuals and the decisions that they make around the bit of land that they've committed to it. If you don't get down to the kitchen table with the forest owner or the landowner, the forest will be neglected. The Forest Service are well-meaning, but some of the bean counters will say, well, we're getting no dividend out of advising farmers on this without measuring it properly. The measurement of the dividend from forestry is a long, slow measurement over time.
Yeah, even if there was a method to flag sites that had gone beyond a certain age that had never had a license application on them, something like that could mobilise a lot of timber.
Yeah, and it's I see it in the Laois group, which is, it's a group that's active for 10 or 15 years, and it's struggling to keep its interest and keep its attention because, the particular challenge of forest is that it is marginalised from agriculture. It's something else. It's a plot that wasn't doing much, and the culture is not there in the farming community to say, this is a really good asset if I look after it just a little bit. You have to seed and feed that engagement at an owner level.
Well, Andy, I think this moves on nicely to your role as an agricultural consultant and how you see farmers interacting with the schemes that are in place. But maybe just to give me a bit of context, primarily what type of farmers are you working with in a general sense, and where are they based geographically?
Up to now, we've dealt with quite a broad range of farm. I'd say a range very reflective of the national scatter. So about 75% of the clients are what I would call cattle sheep farmers. In this part of the world, there might be 4 or 5% of them with a bit of tillage. Then there's maybe about 10% around here in dairying, and then there's a few other, and that's nearly it. We're well representative of the national norm. We'd be scattered across the Midlands, Laois, Offaly, North Tipperary, North Kilkenny, a bit of East Galway. Across the general Midlands, good land, Midland land, and poor land in the hills and on the edge of the bogs and things like that. So quite a diverse range of farmers and farming types and farming situations.
Andy, I know that back in 2023, you co-authored a report called Putting Landowners Front and Centre, in which yourself and your co-author argued that farmers need to be encouraged, supported and incentivised to plant trees. So as a general agricultural consultant may not have the same eyes on this issue that you have, but maybe you'd explain, maybe drawn on that report if it's still relevant, the ways in which the state treats forestry different from the other farming enterprises.
We were frustrated with what was going on, and I had sat on Project Woodland, and some of Finance colleagues had sat on, and we kind of used it to not so much counter it, but to give an alternative narrative. Everything was, and every dog and devil, if you like, was having their say. Some of them having a very disproportionate say, and the Department Forest Service were, fairness, maybe trying to referee it all and trying to pull something out of it. A kind of a glaring omission was that everybody was getting supported, spoken to, opinions sought of, and I know landowners' opinions were sought as well, in fairness, and we felt that one of the big flaws was that forestry was something else. It wasn't farming, and it wasn't proper forestry either, because proper forestry was the domain of the state. Historically, the state had done all the planting and all the land purchase and all the management of forests and all that. And we felt that we needed to go back and unravel all that, not the ownership or anything like that, but the approaches, and deal with some of the issues that were there. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know whether you've come across it, but there's a lot of negative sentiment about forestry in rural communities. And it goes back way beyond present. It goes back to the 40s and 50s. And people tell you about the Department of Lands, whoever they were, coming and taking the land office and giving us a $5 an acre. And true or false, it's there and it lingered. And when you have that kind of negative stuff going on, you need to deal with it. The only way we could dealing with it was, first of all, I kind of alluded to this already, that you sit down and you engage with people at a farm level rather than at a something other level, because it's a land resource and the vast bulk of the resource that you're looking at is in the ownership of farmers. So you have to deal with it at their level, at their fireplace, at their kitchen table, and at their kind of in their mindset. And you have to do that, you have to integrate it really well in with existing farming. So you treat it as an enterprise on the farm rather than as something else. And we've done, I mean, it was very stark to me when I started doing reps. We had to do maps by hand. You come across a forestry block on a farm, you put a red line around it and you mark it CFEX, commercial forestry, excluded. And it surely was excluded, from thought and mind and everything else. I mean, this is not coming from our own stuff. This is coming from, I suppose, a European model where you have, in many parts of Europe, a farm family will have a small plot of forest associated with their farm, and they'll have managed it for 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 generations, and it's there, and they manage it as part of the farm, and they go get their bit of wood when they need it. They go and cut down a decent bit if they have a big debt to pay or a child needs to be educated or something like that. And we didn't go with that model. We kind of shifted the state model onto the private sector, and it hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. And unless we change that model, we're going to, I've argued this time and time again, if you stay doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. Our remedy was to, first of all, make it a farming enterprise. Put it in there with the mix, right? Don't make it something else. Don't discriminate against it in payment terms. Okay, there's a good support system, but you put it in, you lose your disadvantaged area, blah blah blah. We've changed some of those things, but we've a bit to go yet. Support the landowner the same way as we support the landowner through various schemes. I mean, there's a TAMS scheme there, targeted agricultural mechanisation scheme. You could really get a handle for a sweep and brush grant for it, but if you mention getting something for a forest, why we haven't been able to integrate? Because if we integrate at an institutional level, we start to get the farmer integrating his thinking around it as well. So it's, again, multifactorial. You need to support him or her at ground level, but you need to support them in the systems and structures that are there in a mechanism and a way that they're already familiar with.
Am I right in saying prior to 2008, once the forestry premium expired, there was no underlying payment for managing your forest? So, and as you just mentioned there, the ANC, area of natural constraint, you lose that straight away in forestry. If you're an active owner and you want to do a little bit of the forwarding or a little bit of the harvesting yourself, none of that machinery is generally covered under TAMS, whereas for every other farming enterprise, it would be. A quick message of thanks to everyone who has listened, commented, or offered feedback so far to the podcast. It's greatly appreciated. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you listen. Remember, new episodes are released every 2 weeks, and you can sign up for the newsletter in the links below, where you get occasional updates and articles. Now, let's finish the chat with Andy. Well, what other areas then can the state practically change what's there at the minute? Because you say we do now have the BIS, all right, you don't get the ANC.
I think the attitude is the thing. I mean, historically, the Forest Service was very removed from the landowner. I think you have to weigh the emotional attachment farm families have to land in Ireland. It's very deep-seated, and in my 30 years, I thought it would kind of dissipate a bit, but it hasn't at all. This comes back to the coaching thing. I mean, Teagasc have, I don't know how many advisors they have, and there's a shot of private forest consultants. The private forest consultants are kind of on their own, if you like. For the Teagasc guys, I think there might be 10 of them. I don't know what's in, but they get a budget. But there's 110,000 or 120,000 landowners out there. if you do a simple sum and you divide the number of the number of landowners by the number of advisors, you get a very big kind of factor there, So we need to really think about how we support it at that subtle level. It has to come from the ground up, has to be well incentivized. But part of the incentive is to support it at that level. You get in, you sow the seed that this is a good business thing to do. This is a good farm thing to do, but it'll only be good if you engage in it and you, as a landowner. The attitude where we planted it, closed the gate and came back after 15 years is a really bad attitude to have. It encourages neglect.
So let's imagine now, in the last year since the new forestry programme came in last year or two, and you get a farmer who comes into you and he's keen on planting. What are the practical challenges that you run into there when you try and show him his options and he has a reaction to, he or she has to decide whether this is practical, is it even possible? What are the practical things that are pushing against the decision to move to forestry then?
I mean, at the start of our conversation, I said when I planted it, it was simple. It's not simple anymore. I suppose the practical things, I do have landowners. I have 3 or 4 of them there at the minute, despite all the negativity, wanting to plant substantial areas. Reflecting back a little bit, how a landowner, a farmer approaches this is interesting. So they'll make this hard enough decision to say, I'm going to plant a bit of land. And we all know, if we come from an agricultural or farming background, that has a lot of baggage, right? The decision itself. You then try to progress the decision. They come into me and I say, well, I'm not a forester. I'll get you a forester, right? But I know a little bit about it and I'll do a little bit. I look at the map and I'll say, yeah, no, that's peat, right? Problem, or no, there's a breeding wader there somewhere in that square kilometre, and then your man will say to me, I don't own a square kilometre. And no, and I say, well, they found one somewhere in that, and you have to get a board expert to screen that out, right? And we're still in my office. We haven't gone to the forester yet now.
Yeah, okay. But just on that screening for the bird, is that something that has to be done over that kilometre or just his specific farm?
His specific farm has to be assessed in the context of the square kilometre. Literally half the country now is a breeding wader zone. So I have the farmer in front of me and I've told him or her, look, you're in a breeding wader or you're this, that and the other. And I'm lost. He says, I'll rent it to the dairy farmer up the road, will reclaim it for me, and he give me €350 an acre for 5 years or 7 years, and sure, I'll have it back after that. Straight away, I haven't told him about appropriate assessment or, archaeology or anything like that. So yeah, the state has very high ambitions around forestry. I mean, officially, they're talking 8,000 hectares a year. The research will say you probably want to be doing at least more than twice that to meet our climate change targets. I think they might have fallen off the cliff edge or something. But anyway, if we have high ambitions and we need to get land in, we need simply and clearly to make it easy for people to do it. If you're going to make it hard, there are other choices and people will make their choices accordingly.
Just on those particular examples of schemes and screening and habitat. So let's imagine that there is a ground nesting bird or a wading bird that's been found in a nearby area. Are the state actively helping farmers to manage for that endangered species? Are they giving them funds to change the way they're managing to maybe not cut at certain times of the year or not use the land to give these birds space? Or is it that the farmer is basically told, farm whatever way you want, but if you go to plant trees, it's probably not going to happen unless you get this and this report?
You're close to the reality. I mean, there are support schemes for hen harriers and breeding waiters in various EIPs, but they're very tight and they're very I mean, I was in a place not only yesterday, and a gentleman wants to plant a good bit of his land. It's within 15 kilometres of a hen harrier site. So I don't know the right or wrong of it, but if that land was left for 100 years, it would go into trees all by itself. So, and there are 5 million of us or 7 million of us on the island, and we can't not have impacts, and it's a question of managing these impacts as best we can. The answer is that I said to you, it's complex, and it is complex, but at a farm level, I mean, there are many easier things to do with your land other than planting it and going to forestry generally now.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I had an experience of it, and it what it seems is that the state might stop you from planting to protect a species or a habitat, but that doesn't actually protect the habitat from what type of farming you choose to pursue other than forestry. So in the case of that gentleman, he may not be able to plant because of the hen harrier, but he's not actually being supported to encourage the hen harrier to be on his land.
No support at all. I mean, he gets the normal farm supports, the BIS and the eco and things like that. But he said to us yesterday, I was there with the forester, and the forester said, no, we'll do this, this and this. The forester said, there's no guarantee you'll get an approval. And he said to me, if I don't get it, there's a few dairy farmers around here and they'll take 50 or 80 acres off me, no bother. And there's the lesser of two evils at play here all the time. And the state does not seem to be able to recognise that. If it went into forestry, albeit within 15 kilometres of a forest, it surely could be more beneficial to the environment. And I don't want to downplay do down dairying than an intensive dairy farm going on where there was previously a relatively extensive beef farm. I mean, there's choices that have to be looked at here. The ultimate choice now is between forestry or not. If he doesn't get forestry, this land will go to dairying. And we know the outcomes,
Yeah, and because you're close to farmers and and I mean, the age profile of farmers is, predominantly stacked towards the older end of the spectrum. You have farmers, as you say, that are maybe retiring. Some of them will maybe be lucky enough to have someone to come into the business with them, a family member, but also farmers who are thinking of selling or downscaling. All these rules and habitat designations, do you see that actually they have affected the resale value of the land? Because surely if I'm an intensive dairy farmer and I'm running a good business, I'm keen to expand that business, am I going to pay as much for a land that has designation, or are the designations making people less willing to actually buy the land at the higher prices we're seeing in the market?
Sure, it has to have a depressing. If you impose any burden, and a designation is a burden, whether we like it or not, it's restricting what you can and can't do with the land. So if you have a burden on land, it will affect the value. Simple as. There's no rocket science attached to that. To me, answering that question, it annoys me. I mean, we're delivering, if you like, societal goods here for free. I mean, the logic of it would be if society wants us to manage our land as a collective in a certain way, and that is affecting our livelihoods, surely they have to recognise that in some way, shape or form. If you read some of the European directives and the regs and things like that, it does seem to be acknowledged, but our fellas don't seem to have kind of got around to implementing it yet,
Implementing any kind of...
what you would call payment for PES, payment for environmental services, isn't that it? The broadleaves which you mentioned there is a really classic example of that. You fall off a cliff at year 20 and that's the end of it, and you're grateful after that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's and so this is why we struggle to get the numbers. All of these combined reasons.
There's no one reason, There's quite a number of things at play here, but the landowner will make their mind up fairly quickly if they see, well, it's hard to get into it. There's a lot of regulation. and there's no money of it for 150 years.
Have you noticed a shift in attitude among those who have planted and maybe since the storm, or how do you think they feel about their forestry? Are they happy with the decision they've made, Andy?
Funnily enough, most of the ones, again, bear in mind where I am, I'm in County Laois. We've more of a culture of forestry in Laois than most other places. I mean, Wicklow has a better culture, but there's, I think, 16 or 17% of County Laois under forest, which is a good lot compared to I think the national average is 11. But most of the people in our group would be positive and would know that there's a benefit, but they'd also be fairly established in that they might be planted 15, 20, 25 years, and they're starting to get little income streams in addition to the premiums. And also you're dealing with probably a cohort that have put themselves forward. They're interested anyway. You know, it's not it's a biased sample, if you like, but most of them know that, look, it's a long haul thing, this, and you'll get bits and pieces of income over it, and you need to manage it to get the best income and all that. There's a cohort that are well established and well organised. There's a cohort then that aren't really bothered. It was good for the premiums, you know.
And how do we engage those people?
Back to the challenge of you have to shake the bushes, you have to sit at their tables, but probably if you brought the forestry in with the agriculture, you would have a better chance of engaging with them, because, to be fair, there's a much better engagement with farmers, even if it is through schemes, now than there was when I started off. Most of them are tuned into having to sit down. In simple terms, just tell the advisor what's going on the land this year. It's one conversation, that might lead or create an opportunity to say, well, what are you doing with that bit down there, or you hear about a new scheme or such and such, But if you exclude the forestry from that conversation, you're talking periodic, occasional conversations, or you're engaging with the people that are already converted. So that's the value of the integration to me, that you get it onto the agenda at least once a year, and you say, did you tin it? Would you think about tinning it? Did it burn? Did it blow down? There's a forester up the road there, he'll give you a hand with that, or talk to Joe Soap, he's a good contractor.
No, very good. Andy, is there anything else we didn't touch on there that you see as important?
To wrap it, from my perspective, I think it's all about the landowner and getting him or her engaged. And you do it on the one-to-one, the human level, but you also you support what he or she is doing. Where there's a gap, a financial gap, you support that with incentive, and you don't be deliberately exclusive.
Yeah.
And simple as that. Things follow from that. Then, if you start to think about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Listen, Andy, thanks very much for making the time.
You're welcome.
So that wraps up my interview with Andy Dunne. Thanks for listening, and please feel free to get in touch with queries or suggestions. Until the next time.